For those tuning in, we'll get started in just a minute. Good morning. My name is Jay Murray. I'm Public Information Officer with the Winnipeg Police Service. Just want to thank everyone for coming today and tuning in. We're going to talk about a homicide investigation. But before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we have Angie Tuesday here with us. She sits to my right, to your left. She's the Winnipeg Police Service Family Support and Resource Advocate. Now, for the purposes of this release, I'm hoping to keep it on a fairly narrow perspective, focused on the victim, Melissa Cook. We're looking for more information on her death. But I understand, given some of the circumstances around this release, that there might be broader questions related to MMIWG or other issues. And so if you have any types of those questions, I can certainly attempt to answer them myself, or she may be more appropriate, and I'll call her up at that time. So we'll get started. Just another thing before we get started. This media release contains details that may be disturbing to members of the public, particularly those families directly impacted by matters involving missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people. If you require immediate emotional assistance, call 1-844-413-6649, which is a national 24/7 crisis line, toll-free crisis line that provides support for anyone who requires emotional assistance related to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That's also included in our release if you need it. Members of the Major Crimes Unit are investigating the homicide of Melissa Cook, a 41-year-old who passed away in hospital on August 20th, 2022, after suffering severe burns to her body. Melissa was an Indigenous woman from the Sapotaweyak Cree Nation near the Swan River area. She had been living in the Winnipeg area since April, and she was 5'3" in height with a medium build, brown eyes, and brown hair. Some of you might see a tattoo on the side of her neck in the photo. It said CJ, but again, we're just highlighting the description that we've provided in the release at this time. The Winnipeg Police Service became involved in the investigation into Melissa's injuries on August 25th, after being notified by the Chief Medical Examiner's office that her death had been ruled a homicide. Based on the investigation to date, detectives believe the following. Melissa was unhoused while in the Winnipeg area and may have resided in encampments. She had also spent time at Siloam Mission and in the South Point Douglas area around some of those shelters that are around that nearby. She likely sustained her burns between late June and early July. In early July, she notified a shelter about her injuries and was transported to hospital, where she remained until her passing. The Major Crimes Unit has been working to learn more about Melissa and her activities over the summer, but is asking the public and the media for help. Investigators hope to speak to anyone who knew Melissa, knew about her injuries, or anyone that may have been victimized similarly. Those with information that can assist investigators is asked to call the Major Crimes Unit at 204-986-6219 or Crime Stoppers at 204-786-TIPS. Just regards to Crime Stoppers, information can be provided anonymously, both through that phone number and using their website. So if you know about this investigation and you don't feel comfortable coming forward and putting your name down for whatever reason, you can provide information through that route, and that'll get back to investigators as well. So if there's any questions, I can certainly speak to them.
I know it's hard to get into specifics, but how did your investigators determine that it was a homicide, just based on burn injuries? Yeah,
so she suffered the burns, and they're described to me as severe burns. And I think potentially one question I may get asked in the future is the location of the burns. That's an aspect of this investigation we're going to hold back at this time, but we can acknowledge that she had severe burns to her body. She did live with them for some time. She eventually acknowledged that she had the burns to I believe it was one of the shelters, which in turn triggered transport to hospital. Unfortunately, she later succumbed from these burns, but it was a determination from the medical examiner that this was a homicide. And I think it's potentially some of the things they've learned while she was in hospital and after her death that led to that ruling, that determination. And our investigators have also followed up with that and do believe, in fact, it is a homicide.
Do you know the location where this happened, or is that among the things that you're trying to find out?
Yeah, that is. We don't know all about it. We do know that Melissa wasn't very candid with some of the individuals she interacted with about the injuries. And that's one of the reasons for this release today. The audience that we're hoping to target with this release is that of the unhoused community that she might have been residing with, or anyone that works in and around shelters in the downtown South Point Douglas area. We want to know if she confided in her injuries to anyone, the source of the injuries, or maybe a better timeline as to when exactly they happened. We would certainly encourage those individuals to come forward and provide us with that information. But we don't, just to expand on that, we don't know where and when exactly she sustained those injuries.
She suffered these burns sometime before she passed away, I guess. I mean, I don't know if you could speak to this, but I mean, what kind of pain was she in? What kind of anguish was she going through and having injuries like that and living for so long? Yeah,
she succumbed to her injuries as a result of the burns. So I hope that speaks to the severity of the burns that she had suffered. It's quite possible that she lived with these burns for a number of weeks before seeking medical treatments. Like I said, I know that she wasn't very open about the injuries, especially with staff that worked at the shelters. I know that staff made every accommodation they could to try assist her. I know there was attempts to get her better shoes, better walking equipment, things that would help her deal with these injuries. And ultimately, she did choose to go to the hospital, but unfortunately, they were too catastrophic, the burns, to recover from.
Her death occurred in late August 25th. You're just releasing on it now. I'm assuming it's an investigative thing, but why the delay, or why the time lag between August 25th and today?
It's a very good question, and one I anticipated. There's been a lot of complexities there's a lot of complexities in this investigation, ranging from the circumstances behind her death to releasing information in her picture from a cultural and trauma-informed perspective. Part of the lead up to this investigation or the release, we liaised with Indigenous members and resources within the WPS, and with the help of the RCMP, we also had discussions with her family. So there was a lot of work behind the scenes that went into this release, just to make sure we do it in a cultural and trauma-informed perspective.
How difficult is an investigation like this when you're dealing with people who are very vulnerable and maybe there isn't trust there, things like that? How challenging is it to do this kind of investigation?
That's a great question as well. We certainly recognize some of the difficulties that we've been faced with in this investigation. Another dilemma that we have is we're essentially working backwards, and injuries that were sustained probably sometime before she passed. And so typically in those types of investigations, we want to learn more about the individual, where the individual had been staying, who they've been talking to, what did they disclose to people that were close to them. We've done that. We've taken every step that we can. We've been in touch with shelters in the area. Our investigators have spoken to numerous people that have had involvement with her. But unfortunately, there's still just a lot of questions with this investigation. So again, we've released this plea to the public today. We're hoping really 3 objectives with this release. We want to learn more about Melissa. We want to learn more about the injuries that she sustained, if she disclosed the context of the injuries, how they happened, when they happened. And the third is to identify anyone else that may have been victimized in a similar manner. It's certainly a unique type of injury that we don't often see, somebody be burnt and then it be ruled a homicide. So that's unique in its own aspect. And we're wondering if anyone else has been victimized or similarly. We would encourage them to come forward. But at this time, we haven't identified any additional victims.
Do you know which hospital she passed away at? Is that something you can share?
Yeah, typically it isn't. I'm sorry.
Obviously, you want anyone with information to come forward, but is there anyone in your mind that you think may know something, like a certain group or a certain area where someone may be residing that may know something about Melissa?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the person or persons that did this to her, they certainly know something about this. They know what occurred, and we hope maybe seeing her picture, maybe seeing circumstances of this, knowing that she has a family and the family is grieving over this death, come forward, provide that information. Likely there could have been witnesses to this assault. And then lastly, we would ask that this information. We're hoping again to target and share this information, disseminate it with those that may have lived with her, those that may reside in encampments, those that are unhoused, those that spend time in the South Point Douglas or downtown area shelters. This is information we'd like shared with them. Later this week, we do anticipate providing this information in the form of a poster to individuals in that area or those that live in encampments. So that's another investigative angle we plan to take in this. But in the meantime, we ask anyone that again works in those shelters, anyone that may have dealings with individuals in similar circumstances to share this information.
We're seeing reports from larger cities, Toronto, Edmonton, that there are people that are targeting houseless populations. Is that something we're seeing here in Winnipeg?
There's nothing in this investigation so far to indicate that she was targeted as a result of some of her circumstances there. But I mean, it's certainly a possibility as we learn more in this investigation, but we haven't collected any type of evidence that would suggest that.
There have been, quite a few homicides in Winnipeg this year. Do you keep a total of how many so far, according to Winnipeg Police?
This will be 41 that we've acknowledged.
I don't know the record off the top of my head. Maybe it's at 44, I'm not sure. But I guess just taking a look at this year, is there a way to explain why there have been so many and it's approaching a record year? Are there any trends or factors that police are seeing that can maybe sort of indicate why there have been so many this year?
I think the easiest way to explain it would be that we've seen more violence than we've really seen before. But homicides are interesting in that there's a lot of variabilities and variables, that kind of dictate where the homicide count goes. A lot of it can be, there's an element of a I guess the easiest way to explain that again would be there's been a general rise in violence, levels of violence that we really haven't seen before. And that in turn has translated to a higher homicide count. But the reality is the nature of homicides is sometimes they can be crimes of opportunity. They can be random in nature. They can depend on how soon somebody is able to get medical attention. That number would probably be a lot higher. I know that our officers have been trained very extensively when it comes to medical intervention. We now carry tourniquets, chest seals. We have packing bandages, all tools that we use on a daily basis. And so it's really tough. I don't think that's a number that you can compare year to year and glean a whole lot from. I think there's other metrics that might be more indicative of a general increase in violence, what we're up against. But the homicide number certainly impacts the Winnipeg Police Service. Homicides require an incredible number of resources. They typically start with general patrol members that respond to the initial call. If there's a scene, there's evidence collection that has to happen by our forensic identification unit, the detectives that are involved, whether it's the homicide unit or the major crimes unit. So they're very taxing on the service. And 2019 was the record with 44. We have 3 months to go and we're only 3 away from that number.
Is anyone tracking how many people experiencing homelessness are dying here in Winnipeg?
In a general matter, I mean, that would probably be a question for the medical examiner's office. We don't attend every death. Certainly we get involved when there's a criminal component to it, but they might be in a better position to answer that question.
Do you think that there's a reason for the houseless population to be concerned for their well-being at this time?
Again, I think we haven't collected anything to suggest that they've been targeted as part of this investigation, but I do understand and recognize that it is a very vulnerable, that they are very vulnerable.
You spoke earlier about the sort of investigative process that your investigators have spoken to a lot of people. I'm assuming that includes sending investigators to the various encampments and the areas where you would. Can you speak to that in any way? Yeah,
they've spoken to shelters in the area, staff that work in the shelters. They've made contact with people that we know Melissa Cook had associated with. We've worked that angle. Later this week, in lieu of new information coming forward beforehand, we will be, we anticipate passing out this information in the form of a poster to whether, I believe encampments and people that reside around these shelters and people that work at these shelters will be the targets for those posters. So It's been a very unique investigation. Again, we're working backwards from information that we received after her death. And there's a lot of complexities and challenges that we've been faced with this investigation. We've made some progress. We've learned some things about Melissa, a lot of which we've communicated here today, but there's still a lot of unknowns, and we're really relying on the public to help us with this. Friday was the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Tomorrow is the National Day of Action for MMIWG. I just asked members of the public, look at this with an empathetic lens. See the person behind this picture. We've talked to her family. Her family is grieving as a result of her death, her homicide. Her family wants to know more. They want to have justice and they want answers. And I think we all have a civic duty to provide information if we have it and try to advance this investigation and provide them with the closure that they deserve.
With it being likely that we're going to eclipse that 2019 record in the coming weeks or months, mathematically on pace for 55, but that's of course very random. What would your message to Winnipeggers be? Because I know we've seen all sorts of homicides this year, and you talked about the general increase in violence, and I think when people see that 45, if it comes at some point this year, they're probably going to wonder, if they're safe going out and doing the things they do on a daily basis.
The vast majority of crime, violent crime in this city isn't random. It's typically between two parties that previously knew each other. But I don't want to ignore the fact that there is random violent crime in the city. It's certainly there is, and it's an extreme concern for us. But most homicides that occur here in Winnipeg are between two parties that previously knew each other. The big message I think I'd like to convey to the public about the homicide number, you want to look at it then more than just the number. That's 41 families here that have lost somebody in a violent manner. And that's 41 families and set of friends that are grieving. I think far too often we focus on it as a number, but the reality is there's a lot of pain behind that number. There's a lot of people that have lost loved ones. And so I think that should be the reminder here too, for the public, is just there's a lot of grief in the community as a result of this number. And unfortunately, that number will probably rise and there will be more pain within Winnipeg. But in terms of, I'll probably try to bring it back towards Melissa Cook for the purposes of this press conference. Again, I'm just asking everyone to look at the situation with an empathetic lens. Melissa had a tough set of circumstances that she was faced with before her death. And I think we all owe it to her to try to provide help so that we can provide some closure to family here.
Is the police service doing any extra steps to protect our house's population to prevent incidences like what happened to Melissa from happening again?
So again, I want to bring it back to the fact that we haven't identified any aspect of this investigation to suggest that she was targeted because she was unhoused. So I'm trying to be very careful of not maybe going down a path of needlessly alarming a community that doesn't necessarily need to be. I recognize that they're very vulnerable and they're at probably a higher propensity for violence or to become victims of crime. But we haven't identified any aspect of this investigation that would suggest that they're being targeted for that reason. We work with those communities on a daily basis. We have officers that visit encampments, that work with community groups, where certainly we have our ears to the ground. And if we hear of anything like that, we're quick to act. You can look at past investigations. Unfortunately, we've had murders in the past where people were targeted because they were homeless. There was a series of 3 murders that happened a few years back, 3 individuals that were targeted essentially for that reason. Somebody was held to account very quickly after the fact for those 3 murders. So when we identify that there might be evidence of that they're being targeted for that reason, we'll be very quick to act. But we'll continue to do what we do, which is liaise with those community groups, liaise with shelters, and provide support wherever we can.
But just to be clear, at this point, you don't believe that is the case in this instance, at this point?
There's no evidence to suggest that she was targeted for that reason at this point. And it's not to say certainly that it can change. If it changes, then we'll certainly approach this with a different perspective. But we simply don't know a lot about her injuries right now. Again, they're very specific and particular, unique. The fact that she was burnt, that's not an injury that we often see here in Winnipeg. So we're hoping if anyone else has been burnt as a result of an assault, we would certainly like to hear from them. And again, anyone that can help us learn more about Melissa or how she sustained those injuries, please contact us as well.
Have you seen victims of assault or homicide victims with similar injuries? Does this like suggest that it might be part of a string of like similar attacks?
Like I said, we haven't identified anyone else that suffered injuries similar to her, recently at least. And but we can't rule out the fact that there might be somebody out there. I mean, Melissa likely lived with these injuries for a number of weeks before seeking help. I guess it's certainly possible that there could be others out there. But again, we haven't seen any evidence of that at this point.
I don't know if Ms. Tuesday has anything to add to this, or if she.
Do you have any remarks or? I mean, unless there's any questions about the broader scope of MMIWG.
Well, if she can speak to that, I would.
We can bring her up. I mean, one thing I'll say about Angie is she's been an incredible asset for not only myself, but various members of the service. Times have changed. We need to approach things with a different perspective. We need to approach things with a trauma and cultural informed perspective. Angie's been an incredible asset when it comes to that. She's helped investigators. She's helped myself and other public information officers. So perhaps I'll bring her up here. I know she's talked in the past about her role, and she can speak to her role. And if there's any questions, she can answer for that.
Can I just ask you one
Yeah.
question? Sorry. The two homicides of Friday and Sunday, was it? Any arrests in those, or any charges in those, or they're still?
We've updated the name of the victim that was found. I believe it was Sherbrooke and Cumberland. Credence Beardy, I believe is his name, 27 years old. So we've identified his name. You'll have to double check the name. I'm sorry, I just don't have it in front of me. But we provided that update today. Both investigations are still ongoing and certainly would solicit any information from the public. But again, emphasis here is Melissa Cook. We think this is going to be a very difficult investigation of progress. It might be challenging to get information. I ask members of the public to see the person in this matter. Melissa Cook has loved ones that are grieving, and I think we owe it to her and her family to try provide any answer we can get to further this investigation. And I'll come up after in case there's any other questions.
Hi, good morning. I'm Angie Tuesday. I'm the Family Support and Resource Advocate. I'm here today as a visual source of support for the family of Melissa Cook. My role, of course, is to provide ongoing support to families and others who are impacted by the issue of MMIWG and 2S people. Tomorrow is a very important day in that we're honoring and celebrating our loved ones' lives. And so it was important for me to be here to show that support to Melissa's family and to other families who are going to be impacted by hearing that that we're adding to our growing number of families who are being impacted and who are grieving their loved ones. So that's why I'm here today. I don't know if anyone had specific questions for me, but I'd also like to acknowledge, and thank the members who are investigating Melissa's death for taking the time to consult with me about how they can improve their practices. They've asked me to consult with them on culturally informed, trauma-informed ways to meet with members of the houseless community or other people who may not feel safe in speaking with police. So I think that when Jay is speaking about how things are changing within the police, I just wanted to acknowledge that, take that time to acknowledge the Major Crimes Unit for taking that time. And I think it's really important for Melissa, for her family, and for other families as well to know that there are changes that are happening. So, any question?
Angie, I know you've spoken to this a couple of times already before, but from a broad perspective, what are some of those culturally informed ways that you go about having a conversation that nobody wants to have with some of these families?
Well, I think a lot of it is coming to the families where they're at. So some families, it really depends as well, where what the family is needing at that time. But a lot of it is, calling to make an introduction, and speaking to them one-to-one, from a place of caring, and that doesn't always mean meeting with them at the police headquarters building. It doesn't always mean meeting with them at any police building or any government building. So I've had a lot of support from my counterparts in Winnipeg Police Victim Services to be able to meet families in their homes if that's what they're needing, or in their communities, to be able to share their memories of their loved one, and to be able to talk about what other supports are available and introduce them to other community members that have experienced what they've experienced or similar losses, and also those who are there to help support on a community level as well. So I really owe a lot to my community counterparts for being able to support that work and support those families.
Jay made a point of that to look past the numbers, that it's not just a number, it's a person with a family and such. Can you speak any to that in terms from your perspective, the idea that this is a person who had loved ones, who had a community, and now they're gone?
Well, that's a
Sorry if I put you
loaded
on the
question.
spot. Sorry if I put you on this.
No, that's okay. Honestly, I think Jay said it best. Melissa, any person who has lost their life has loved ones. Melissa was, from the sounds of it, someone who was living unsheltered in the community, but that doesn't mean that she didn't have people who loved her and cared about her. That doesn't mean that she didn't have friends or people in her life that supported her. So that's what I think is really important. A really important takeaway is, yes, we're at 41, but we're in speaking about Melissa. She had people in her life. The other folks who have lost their lives this year, they have family and friends and loved ones. We can't just think about our statistics, right? Because then that takes away from who the person was and what their circumstances were, and it really is dehumanizing. So I think I would just actually leave it there when we're talking about numbers. Yeah.
Just head back up. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
The last thing I just want to talk about, I believe there's always benefit to an open, honest discussion. I'm hoping that this doesn't become a focus of the story, but it's something I want to bring up because I'm sure it'll probably come up online, is the use of the photo. Part of the reason for the delay in this release was making every attempt to find a different photo of her. Some people might see her obituary photo online. It's been described to me that from her family that she looked like a completely different person now, and the photo was likely 5 to 10 years old. The reason for releasing this information is to try to further an investigation. That's ultimately our priority here. We want to provide justice for the family. The photo that we released, we believe, is the best and most accurate depiction, or will provide the most, we believe that photo is the most accurate as to what her appearance before she passed. And again, I hope this isn't a focus of it. I don't want it to be. We made every attempt to try and get another photo. Unfortunately, this is the best photo we have. But again, it's a reminder. I just want people to see the person in this matter. I've talked to people who have personally dealt with Melissa. She was described as a very kind and caring person. And again, she was enduring, I think, a number of tough circumstances in her life before she passed. But she is somebody's loved one. She has a family. She likely has friends. And there are people who miss her. There are people who want justice. And I think we just need to remember that when in the components and the perspective of this release. So.
Where's the picture from?
Again, I think I'll probably not say where it's from. I think anyone can deduce maybe the source of that information. But again, I'm really hoping that that doesn't become a focal point of the story. But I just, for the interest of open and honest discussion, why we use that photo versus another one, it's simply because there were no others to use.
This photo's not 5 to 10 years old.
No,
Okay,
no.
this one's more recent.
no, that photo is within, I believe it was taken within the last year or two, but that's how she looked prior to her passing. So I don't know if there's any other questions. Again, I understand this is a very sensitive release, and I guess I just want to speak to the power of the community. Not long, probably a week or two ago, I stood up here to ask for help on a medical incident in the area of Main and Mountain, and the public really came together. We were able to identify this gentleman's family very soon after that release and allow us to provide some closure for them. So, and that was only because that post and that information was shared widely that we were able to accomplish that goal. We wouldn't have been able to do it ourselves. So for this case, as small as it might seem, simply just sharing this information, whether it's from our social media pages or the news agency that you read this on, or that you use, if you share that information, it can go a long way to helping us obtain some information that can help us further this investigation. And I just want to say thank you to anyone that does help us with this. So, all right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jay.